Could I ask board members to their seats, please?
It's warmed up in here.
With the 7 members being present in the room, I'm going to call this portion of the work session into order. It is about a membership analysis and trends report. And should I call on Mr. Smith? Mr. Smith is busy, then I could call on Mr. Plattenberg. That I want to remind board members that we are now almost 40 minutes behind, and we have a 90 minutes set aside this portion of the work session. Let's not aggravate the amount of us behind any more than as it is now. So,
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Plattenberg.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Moon, members of the school board. Today, we have the opportunity to go ahead and have a discussion about our membership analysis and trends report. Keep in mind that this is an informed amount of data that's provided through DIT's September 30th data, and it also talks to and goes across many of the instructional lines for the Department of Support Services, Student Services, the Department of Instructional Services. When we take a look at all of the different data sets that come in, the AAP, that basically inform this data, it really is a broad sweep of who would be responding to any inquiry regarding programs and movement and shifts and trends that we might have. While our Office of Planning Services actually reports this out, any one of those departments could actually be sitting up here reporting out this data had we provided it to them, and they may be needing to be the ones to follow up. With that, Ms. Gillis has done, and her team have done an outstanding job of putting this together so we can begin this conversation. If you recall, the school board did ask for 2 separate meetings last year as a part of the CIP because we had commingled it due to time. So thank you so much, and Ms. Gillis.
Thank you. Okay, so the Membership Analysis and Trends Report is updated annually by the Office of Facilities Planning Services, and it informs the school capacity evaluations that are part of the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program. Understanding the changes in the membership from year to year is essential to the planning facilities process, and the changes form the basis for recommendations related to additional capital planning and construction projects. I'm going to briefly go through the report layout. We presented the information by topic: membership, birth to kindergarten ratio, migration, transfers, and then we've also included an appendix with the past 5 years of data for each of the tables that we reported on for each of the topics. The report is organized by school type, elementary, middle, high, by region, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and by high school pyramids, and then also separated out into the elementary school level, the middle school level, and the high school level. The total membership, this is the change in membership by school type from school year 1819 to 1920. This is all based on September 30th membership. And the total membership includes all the students who receive instruction within the school division, including general education, special education, AAP, FCPS pre-K, formerly known as FESEP, preschool special education centers, adult education, private school special education, homeschooled, and multi-agency. The total membership is composed of the base subtotal added to the student counts within centers and alternative programs, as well as the other categories. For purposes of this report, the Fairfax County Public School base membership, identified as the FCPS subtotal, the numbers include the traditional FCPS middle schools, elementary schools, and high schools, including Bryant, Mountain View, and Thomas Jefferson. Centers and alternative programs, the membership numbers include Burke School, Cedar Lane School, Davis Center, Kilmer Center, Key Center, Pulley Center, Quander Road School, and non-traditional sites, alternative learning centers, AIM, or the Achievement, Integrity, Maturity Group, and interagency programs. Other membership numbers include adult education, homeschooled, multi-agency programs, and private school special education programs. So as you can see, we have had an increase in membership for regions 1 through 4, and we had a slight decline of 74 students in region 5. The top 6 high school pyramids, including all levels, were for an increase. We had the largest at West Springfield, Justice, and Annandale, and the largest decreases were at South County, Mount Vernon, and Chantilly. Fundamental factors that are reviewed in the report to aid in the evaluation of the change in total membership from school year 18-19 to 19-20 include the birth to kindergarten ratio, which remained at 87% again. The net migration for the student population was a positive net migration of 1,725 students, and the net transfers were 475. I'm going to get into each of these categories a little bit deeper as we go. The birth to kindergarten, this table should look familiar to you. We identified from school year 11-12 through this school year 19-20. The blue line are our number of births each year, and it represents 5 years before they become kindergartners. So you'll see, like for this year, the students would have been born in the school year 13-14, and they would be kindergartners in school year 19-20. The orange line we've included on this slide is the birth to kindergarten ratio. Our highest being 91 in school year 11-12, our lowest about 84 in 16-17, 17-18 school year, and then we've remained the same from last year to this year. Net migration are students that are new to FCPS, or the net of those who have come into or left the division. So last year, you can see we had the first negative net migration in some time. It was negative 357. This year we had a positive, which has kind of followed along with our trends, of 1,725. We have decided to include a separated out yellow bar for the number of TJ students who are new to the system, because there have been several questions about whether the TJ students are included in net migration or not. Just for the first year, TJ students would be included. So approximately 147 students have migrated into FCPS for TJ. So net migration, this one is a little bit off. For the net migration, we have positive net migration at all of our school levels. We have a negative net migration at our centers and alternative programs and our other categories. But overall, as I mentioned, we had a total increase of 1,725 students. The negative net migration is only at Region 3, where we lost 45 students. The rest, we showed a positive. And then our 6 pyramids with the largest net migration include West Springfield, Justice, and Annandale with the highest increase, and Westfield, West Potomac, and Mount Vernon with the highest decrease. We've included the transfers by reason of the total membership, the largest being advanced academic program of 26.4% of the transfers, and special education with 21%. The top 3 reasons, besides those 2, the last one was the student transfer regulation, which we can go into more depth. But that would include things like high school curricular, sibling transfer, childcare, and then the military. So the undetermined category, I'd like to highlight that one to explain it. It includes students transferring for who are non-Fairfax residents, students in foster care, Fairfax County Community Pre-K, and then residents in temporary housing, cluster placement, global STEM, which is at Edison High School, and region placements. Category called pending transfers includes students without a reported transfer reason. So that's usually to be cleaned up in later months. This reflects September 30th membership. The net transfer by school types. These positive net transfers for centers and alternative programs as well as others. We don't have a transfer out for these, so it would always be a transfer in, so it will always have a positive. So students would be transferring out from one of our sub-base totals into one of these programs. Our net transfers by region, Region 2 had the highest number of transfers in with 391, and the other regions had negative net transfers. The top 6 pyramids with the largest net transfers, Thomas Jefferson, Lake Braddock, and South Lakes had the highest, and Mount Vernon, Westfield, and Annandale had the largest decline, negative net transfer. Questions? Thoughts?
Okay, thank you so much. Don't have anyone on the list yet, but Ms. Chairman Corbett Sanders.
Thank you. Appreciate this and look forward to unpacking it a bit more. I will say that in skimming through the report, it's a very comprehensive report, and I appreciate it. It is significantly more detailed than previous years, and I encourage everybody to take a look at it. I do have some questions, especially on the net transfer in and out. I see that South County, Mount Vernon, and Chantilly are the highest pyramids for largest change in membership, and that's spread out across all of the schools in that area. So I think that's really important for people to recognize that it's elementary, middle, and high school. And when I look at the Mount Vernon in particular, it's more at the elementary and middle school this year. In previous years, it was people responding to the generous approach that we took to the military transfers, that we had significant numbers of people transferring out from Mount Vernon to a neighboring school. But I did want to ask a couple of things. One is whether or not, what is the free and reduced meals population numbers for South County, Mount Vernon, and Chantilly? And do we see a higher percentage of people transferring out of schools that have significant FRM that are able to provide their own transportation? The second is, I would like to know how many foster students we actually are providing services to. And then when we look at the transfer in, that's Region 2 has the highest number. Is that because of, and I don't remember this, is TJ in Region 2? And so that captures all of the TJ numbers as well, I presume. And so it may be helpful, kind of like we pull out our alternative schools, we should probably more explicitly pull out TJ because it shows a different story when we do that. And then I know that we are looking at ways to address some of these issues as far as people moving from school to school. And when you see the highest percentage of students who are moving are because of the advanced academics, does that also include the AP versus IB? No, it does not. Okay, thank you. That's helpful to know. And then the last piece, this is really a snapshot. I want to make sure people understand this is a snapshot in time. It really doesn't look at what planned developments are based on what the Fairfax County Planning Commission has already approved, which will result in more numbers. Higher number of students in certain areas, correct?
Right, this is just a straight comparison of last year's numbers to this year's numbers.
Thank you.
And if I may, on, one of the questions that was asked was about free and reduced, and that's on page 114 of the other attached document. The other attached document that you would refer to of having people delve into further, and I know you haven't had enough time to really, it's a 114-page document that goes into a number of those different components, including the free and reduced.
Ms. McLaughlin? Oh, Mr. Moon? May I?
Okay.
Just a moment, since Ms. Karen Corbett Sanders, Chairman Karen Corbett Sanders commented on this, and Mr. Moon made a comment, and I'm thinking about last Thursday. We're in this discussion of data and analysis. Look at this compared to 3 or 5 years ago. Right? I know. We're doing more analysis, providing more transparent information, whether it's budget, facility, CIP, and that's our commitment to you. So there's still some areas as we go through this that we need to tweak and learn to work together and find out what's still missing. But we have made a concerted effort to work with this board so that the community and the board has the transparency and analysis that you all have requested. And I know Dr. Presidio is going to come up after this, and he had his 80-page analysis that Mr. Moon talked about on Thursday about reading. And I know this is 118 pages, so you may have other things that come out after this. But I just want to thank Jessica and Jeff and Marty and the team. And Jessica in particular, you have done outstanding work to deliver best-in-class information for the school district.
So, Dr. Brand, I somehow do not have 118 pages. Is that?
106.
Am I missing something?
So there was a version 4, which was posted today. It's 113 total pages.
Pleasure. Yeah, we apologize. For your information, the document, the handheld one that you had, right, we had revisions that were pointed out to us by one of your members of your body, and we had to have that inclusion of another pyramid. So that's why, and the online document does have the, well, it's 113, but 114 with the
Okay.
final
Because
page.
what I had was 85 pages, so I'm missing 30 pages.
So part of those 30 pages were the appendix that we included based on our meeting manager's discussion with you. It
Okay,
was
which
the
I just didn't
5-year.
have yesterday. Thank you. Okay, I'm all done with responding to Chairman Corbett Sanders. I have Janie Strauss to be followed by Mrs. Schwartz and Mrs. McLaughlin.
Okay, maybe the updated material was included in the report on page 13, table 9, you were missing Herndon. Has that been fixed? Table 9, elementary school membership by race and ethnicity and attending high school pyramid, SY 2019. Okay, so it's, all right, so in the updated, okay, all right. Thank you, okay, right. Okay, I
Ms.
have,
Strauss, are you referencing the larger document now?
yes,
that what you're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about?
and so
Okay.
that was updated, fine, okay, that's fine. I had one question on the change, and again, knowing this is September, right, 2 questions. One, for center and alternative schools, there was a decrease. Do we know why? Or we're just counting numbers at this point? We're just counting numbers, okay. All right. And then,
Let me give you my initial thinking,
Right.
though, is honestly, we've made some changes to our SR&R where we're keeping kids in base schools and not necessarily sending them to alternative schools or centers. So I don't have the deep down analysis yet, but my initial thinking as I'm looking at that data is that may be the
That's
beginning at
what-
least of some of that.
that's what I was wondering, I just don't know. Also, in terms of our projected enrollment for this fall and staffing, as I'm now meeting with all of the Drainsville schools, how close were we with our expected enrollment and as to where it was going to be or not going to be? So given that we now know how many children are actually in the schools, so how close were we?
So our overall percentage accuracy from last year's projections to this year's actuals for September 30th, we are 99.877% accurate.
Okay, so again, we were really very accurate. And were there any other schools that were outliers to a really unexpected extent?
We had some that were unexpected, Justice High School being one of them. We're still digging into some of that as we are preparing this year's projections for next year.
Okay, all right.
And we'll be able to have a little bit deeper conversation when we present the CIP
Right,
We'll have a little
exactly,
more time
yeah.
for that. Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
because that's always very important to see if there were outliers and to why, and then, again, how we base things going forward. And then I guess as a result of now knowing how many children that we have, I am assuming that there was some readjustment of staff. I'm aware of some, which I'm always pleased to see, that schools that were not justified for a position, they lost the position, as well they should, or if they needed more. So do we have any, but again, this is just a numbers, but maybe Mr. Smith knows how much rearrangement of staff.
So we can provide that information to you. We have used positions within the staffing
Right.
reserve to provide those enrollment fluctuations to schools. So when enrollment did increase, schools worked with their region offices, and then we worked with human resources and finance to provide those additional positions.
Right, I haven't heard any huge issues, but that's the so what. Now that we have counted the noses appropriately, then how did we respond with staff? And did we provide enough in the original budget and staffing to make the adjustments? And where a school was going to lose staff, which does happen, were we also able to do that and then place them somewhere else where it was more needed? So how did that all go? So I guess it would be a next step, and at some point.
We can provide that as a next
Sure.
step.
Right, okay, great, thank you. And again, as I'm talking with schools, I'm hearing that by and large, staffing went well, that people were able to hire the folks that were needed, and that where the projection wasn't exactly what was expected, it was close enough, and they were able to adjust staff up or down depending on the need. But we do need to see the actual numbers, so thank you.
I have a Mrs. Church to be followed by Mrs. McLaughlin.
Okay, so, Mr. Smith, this is going to be a familiar conversation because we had it last night during our Comprehensive Planning and Development Committee meeting. So, Dr. Brabrand, I agree that there is more data. At this point on my gravestone, it'll probably say data, data and context, meaningful data and data, meaningful data and context. So there's a difference between giving us more information and doing actual analysis to help inform us in strategic decision-making. And first of all, having 1 year, it's like doing a dipstick on your oil. You know the situation of your car at that particular point in time. We've got to get to a point where the information is provided over time, because then you start to understand what's happening. I think on this report in particular, for example, if you could go to slide I don't know if it's 5 on the PDF. Yes. So this is interesting, but what does it really tell us? What does this mean? So this is information, but it doesn't necessarily mean something. Now, I think it's interesting that there's a negative change in membership at Chantilly, for example, in the Chantilly pyramid, but is that mostly at high school? Is it just the high school? Is the 196 only the high school, or is it the pyramid itself?
The entire pyramid.
So it's the entire pyramid. So I don't really know what that means. Chantilly has, for example, an academy. So if there's more transfers in to Chantilly because people say, I'd like to access the academy and I don't want to have to move, are those the pupil placements? But there's a negative overall. So what does that mean? So another example, if you can go up one page. So this gets into a little bit more granular information, not necessarily analysis. So we are having, and I've done the data and I've shown you, and I'm going to produce another set of slides before I leave. We have a major uptick in high school, in overall high school population over time. And so on a predictive analysis, if you are looking at, okay, what are our needs? And you think about, for example, I asked a couple of years ago, what are we doing? How are we anticipating the closure of Paul VI High School, for example? Because some people are not going to make that drive. And have we had conversations where we're trying to predict? Because if you're continually seeing an increase in membership, but I don't know that this is continual over time, 600 students, but 600 students where? Because we have 25 high schools. So if it's evenly distributed across the entire division, 600 students might not be that big of a deal, but that's an entire graduating high school size. So if there is, for example, a heat map that goes along with this that shows where the facility pressures are, then, like we were having in our CPDC conversation, I know I'm out of time, I'll ask for a go back, but now you start to have a comprehensive strategic discussion with the supervisors and facility use and land planning and everything else of where is the trend analysis of this increase, where is it happening, and that helps have a greater, more in-depth correlation to the decisions this board has to make and start solving 10 years problems ahead instead of 20 years problems back, which is what we're solving now.
You know, it's a good point, and some of the things that you referenced, Ms. Schultz, in that 114-page document, on page 78, it does show the high school transfers out, and I know there'll be more informed questions that you ask, but you raised an excellent point.
Okay, I have Mrs. McLaughlin to be followed by Ms. Pelchik, Sandy Evans, and Tammy Dana Fairfax.
So I appreciate being able to follow Ms. Schultz because I had an identical reaction. So the glow, Dr. Brabrand, is that these data charts, basically they're trend data. It's very helpful to see this, and you know, going through the report, just for people who haven't looked at it, it's 82 pages of charts and descriptions of those charts. And it's a great first start because we haven't done this. And so I really appreciate, as a GLOW, that we have this. I think this is where we begin. But Dr. Brabrand, I know since you've got your doctoral work from Virginia Tech, this is not data analysis. And the report says membership analysis. And when we think about intentionality for our community and also for the board and even for you as a leadership team, getting the data into the charts, that's the start one. Then it's the analysis from it. It's the why. Why do we have this information? What will it do to inform decision-making? What will it do for operational actions and decisions? And so I'm not, again, trying to be difficult, more so to provide the compliment of thank you, this is a start, but to the prior work session we just had on the budget as well, it's so crucial that you help lead our division because you have amazing people on your leadership team with tremendous amount of academic preparation and ability to do what we want to see, which is do the analysis piece now of what this gleaned and tell us what that might mean for us as a division, because the board, we're to govern, you guys are to operate, but I don't know what you're even thinking from this report, how this is going to inform the way you and your leadership team will take action. So I think that's a key piece that I wanted to first touch on.
I think the work that we're doing, and I'll let Mr. Plattenberg add too, this will better help inform our CIP work, which can even help inform the conversations that we have about our CIP solutions or potential solutions before the board. Mr. Plattenberg.
Yeah, and it's exactly what Dr. Brabrand mentioned. The fact that you're asking these questions, you've been asking these questions, is a perfect example of this doing exactly what we wanted it to do. It shows the initial tipping of the iceberg of where we need to get into, as you said, the analysis component. The analysis component will require more of a collaborative element of DSS and ISD. And when we put this data together and have the first, the timing of when we get it and bring it before this body, we were pleased that you wanted to bifurcate, separate, so that we could begin these conversations. And the fact that you're probing even further and demanding even more analysis of the data are just, I think it's in keeping with what Mr. Smith and our team had talked about in moving in that direction. We totally agree in having the departments that represent each of these areas to be able to provide that type of analysis and informed interpretation of what the data reflect. And that's why I said at the beginning, we do data, we present the data, but the analysis component that we did initially is really just showing that trending. It's not that deeper analysis that you're looking for.
I appreciate that, Mr. Plattenberg. I guess I'm just kind of wanting to use this as a positive opportunity to help us be more intentional, Dr. Brabrand, in what we're communicating as a division. This is titled as membership analysis, and it's not. I would posit that we should probably say membership data report, because otherwise the public is going to look at this along with any individual board members and say, there wasn't analysis done yet. It's reporting. And you'd mentioned that we need to do the deeper down analysis. There hasn't been any analysis yet. It's just reporting our numbers in a very helpful way to then help drive to the next step. And I think that's where I'm trying to just push this messaging of, this is awesome. Now let's go to where it can really be a meaningful tool for you and your team, because right now that's not what we have here in front of us. And I will just say this, I don't think it's just the CIP. We have real issues about where we place our programs, how we deliver our programs, and what that creates in terms of lots of transfers and lots of busing. And so from a policy and an operational standpoint, this has severe value to going to that next level. And that's the part that I hope we'll have the next work session to talk about this. I hope this is not a once a year thing, but this is just the jump start.
Okay, thank you. I have Ms. Patrick to be followed by Ms. Evans and Mr. Narcofax.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Plattenberg, Ms. Gillis, and Mr. Smith, and Dr. Brabrand. I agree with a lot of what my colleagues said. I appreciate that this has so much more information and charts and historical perspective than we've had in the past. And I hope that this can help improve the way we move forward with our CIP and hopefully our CIP with the county CIP. I know that's a conversation we were having last night at CPDC. So a couple things. Number one, when we talk about, I guess I'll ask my questions. Net migration, if you can clarify for us and for the public, when we're looking at a region's net migration or a school's net migration, does that include or not include students coming from other schools within the county? So is net migration, we're looking at just families coming from outside, or yeah, so nodding yes. So when we're looking at net migration, it means either children entering school for the first time in FCPS, correct, who were maybe 4-year-olds last year, as well as any families that may have moved into the county. Okay, but it does not include students moving from one part of the county or one school to another, no transfers. Okay, that's very helpful, thank you. And then the other question or comment as we look at the CIP, and I appreciate Ms. Corbett Sanders has been doing her own adding up of the approved projects in the county. And I know it can be tricky and some things are approved and maybe not built for 20 years. But as we are seeing these one-offs, especially I know my district, Hunter Mill, are growing quite rapidly, Providence and Hunter Mill, I would love for us to start to find ways so that we don't have board members, or yesterday I sat next to a city board member who have, everything they know is coming down the pipeline. So if we can start to look at through the CIP, okay, these are the projects we know have been approved in these school pyramids. These are expected enrollments, and we do or do not have expected, development time. So this definitely, collaboration with the county, but I know we do see when the proffer requests are coming through that information. So hopefully we can do that more systematically. Would love your comments on that. And then finally, there's just a very quick error, I believe, on what I see as page 96. has Herndon now listed as Region 0, unless I'm looking at an outdated chart. So my page 96 on, I believe, what's posted. Oh, okay, thank you. All right, so I guess if you have any feedback on the possible steps we can take for that CAP inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the December 16th meeting, the joint meeting with the county folks, I think is a good opportunity for us to further that discussion. And Ms. Gillis mentioned that in my ear while you were saying it. That's exactly what we've been talking about. Keep in mind, we did have that group come and speak before this body as a part of the CIP, showing those trends because of the push. But as was mentioned before about deeper analysis, that's getting it to that next level as well. So I think having that show, it's shown by magisterial district and therefore then by region, I think will add information. But keep in mind, when we have those conversations, where there are tear down and rebuilds and the impact on that, it still doesn't capture that. But for the most part, yes, what you're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Moon, if I could, something I just want to set the stage, I think, with this board as we transition into a new board. We are going to have a lot of big decisions to make around boundaries. We discussed boundaries for a year and a half, had a little bit of a pause, but we need to get back after the consultant does the work to look at our policy. We have programs. We have programs all over the county that impact the capacity of schools. And we're going to have an AAP consultant coming and finishing a study, and that's going to be on the table for this board. We are not going to be able, with our existing facilities, to handle the growth that is coming to Fairfax County. So we have, the next board will have a lot of heavy lifting, and we have to figure out, and I'm asking the board members who are leaving and those that are returning to help set the stage for the community. I'm just going to be completely transparent. We need to be able to bring honest recommendations here and have honest conversations that aren't going to be turned around and be used outside of here as we need to be able to come here and bring you transparent and authentic recommendations and have them used in a manner that's bringing the whole community forward. And I think that's a very hard thing to do. These things are very sensitive issues to our community and it's very concerning. But I think about the boldness of asking the administration to be bold is maybe sometimes there's that culture of feeling that being bold sometimes has repercussions because of the sensitivity that exists in the community. So we've got to figure out how do we set the right table, and I want to help set it. That we're going to talk about boundary policy, we're going to talk about programs and where they're located, and we're going to talk about, even with all of that, we got more people coming into this system. Ms. Corbett Sanders shared with me some of the things that are, Top Golf's going and more homes are being put up. I mean, you start looking at this, we're not going to be able, with our current footprint that's already on a 37-year CIP, to get all this done without some serious heavy lifting. There are major structural decisions that are going to have to be made, both about adding capacity and how we use our existing capacity. And how do we do that in a place where we're working together positively and we want the administration to bring their best thinking without it becoming without it becoming negative for our community and for the work that we do. And that's hard to do, but I just want to say it up front.
Are you done, Ms. Pelchik? Okay. As you go on to the next board, I'm sure that you'll be mindful of all the good suggestions being made at this table.
I appreciate it. But since you gave me the spot, I guess I wanted to clarify, and I know we have community members here who are concerned in a county where we cannot buy more land, where there's not land, where we've grown so much. How are we being proactive and planning ahead for having the facilities in place that we need? And I think the more we can do to show that that is a collaborative effort, it's not 100% guaranteed because, the world of development and growth is not 100% guaranteed. But we do. I think we're getting to a place of no more room to grow, and how do we ensure we have facilities for those kids?
Okay, thank you. I have a Ms. Evans to be followed by Dana Kovacs.
Thank you so much for all the great detailed information and these reports. It's very helpful. I have been through it and have a number of questions, which I think some of them will be for a Mason District conversation. When are you anticipating you'll have data available for district-by-district conversations about the CIP?
Yeah, in December is usually when we begin to have that information, to be able to have that further conversation.
All right, okay. So a couple of things. One is just a question about the migration. You see Annandale High School has significant numbers, and the Annandale Pyramid does not have an elementary school AAP center, nor a middle school AAP center, so I would be interested to know in that instance if that's really what's driving that number, since that's such an outlier. If you have an immediate answer to that question, that's fine. Overall, one of the things that comes up in Ms. Gillis, you mentioned Justice High School being an outlier in terms of numbers. One of the things that is of great concern to me, and I'm sure to you too, is the schools with high mobility. We can talk about our projections for the school system as a whole, and we're like just right on target on that. School by school is another matter, and particularly those schools and those pyramids that have high mobility, those schools and pyramids that are more subject to being influenced by the economy, by immigration. I'm concerned about our ability to have the flexibility. Bailey's Primary this year, I believe they were projected to have 10 kindergartens and instead have 13. So, something like that, we need to be able to adjust for that, and particularly mid-year. I certainly have plenty of schools that receive a burst of enrollment mid-year. And so I have long advocated that we crank in mobility as a factor in our staffing. I've only just, I had one situation. I've only learned today that one of my schools didn't get a half a counselor, and it's primarily because the projection was that they wouldn't have as many students as they were going to have. But in the end, they had as many that should have had a half a counselor for them, but they're still not getting it. And I don't understand that. How is it when we know in September that they have 552 students and are entitled to a half a counselor? Why would we not dip into the staffing reserve for that? I would think that's one of the reasons that we have the staffing reserve. So anyway, I do think that we need to be in all of these. I mean, I know you do a great job of projecting where students will be, but at the same time, you can't be taking into account everything that's going on in the outside world. So somehow we need to be able to take the numbers that you have, here in black and white, but at the same time, adjust as needed. So, I've asked a couple of questions there in particular about how we factor in mobility, and also, I guess this is a question for Dr. Brabrand. How is it that a school wouldn't get a staffer that it was entitled to just because the projection was under?
Well, the specific matter, that's one, if you just offline send to Mr. Smith and myself, we can, and the RAS.
And certainly to reach out to Dr. Zuluaga.
Yeah, we can work. The regions have worked very collaboratively. Like Ms. Strauss said, we've worked really to deal with any issues around staffing in schools.
Well, and
through our staffing reserve.
this is actually the answer that I just got today from you about this particular situation. And one of the answers was that, well, the staffing reserve is used for classroom teachers. Well, in this case, a counselor at this school that has a lot of kids experiencing trauma, I don't know why we would not put the counselor back in there.
Yeah, since Ms. Evans received an invitation to have that discussion offline.
I'm not familiar with the question or the answer. We can look at it. That's what I would say on that one. On the other, we have brought the mobility report where we sort of overlaid mobility and FRM, and there were a few outliers. and we've talked about whether to do some things differently. I know, I would say that's something that we're looking at as I'm preparing the budget. Are there a couple of schools that have such mobility that we need to do something different without necessarily having to change the whole formula and then create a whole nother formula? So I think we need to be mindful that that's going to continue to be an issue, and we are looking at that.
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. Narcofax to be followed by Karen Kiskamara.
Thank you, and thank you all for this excellent report. I do want to commend you for the detailed nature. I have not gone through the entire 114-page report, but I have been trying to briefly go through it. And based upon what I have done since I've been on the board for the 8 years, I create my own charts every year, and we do it at the same date, same time, when you tell us the membership numbers are official. So what's that, October, 1, right? And we do that. So what I see overall in some of my changes, which were kind of shocking to me, 47% of my elementary schools have had drops in population, and they're significant. Minus, 105, minus 76 in elementary schools. And so what I am curious, and I guess Dr. Brabrand, this is for you. Some of them I can kind of guess why it may or may not happen, but I guess my main question is, how will this be handled? Are we going to be able to use the regional assistant superintendents to reach out to principals, to work in conjunction with them? I think there needs to be some kind of comprehensive plan as to how we will get answers to our questions, because facilities, you're doing your job, but you're not out in the field all the time, and you're going to need help. So how is that going to happen? And you can answer that in a second. I know also, you mentioned what Ms. Corbett Sanders, she's done a great job of looking at the county, where the county is projected to build. And one of those is in my district, the one, and this school unexpectedly had 150. Edison High School had 150 new students, and I don't know where they came from. And that's the kind of information, like, how does it reconcile that several of my elementary schools went down so much, my high school's going up, we have building that's going to happen. And I know CPDC, Elizabeth, we were trying to get to that answer. How are we going to do this? What way are we going to demand ourselves to be put into this process with the county, with the land use people, with the Board of Supervisors, to ensure that when they make these decisions, they have to make it with data in mind? And how can you already, at a school that's at capacity, that just had a renovation, that has 150 new students, you're going to put 1,000 housing units in their backyard? And I know you work with them, but there is not a process. So those are the two big questions I have. And I know you probably don't have an answer to that, but one is immediate. One is immediate process. How do we get analysis now? How do I take my 8 years of data on a page and look at this and look at what you're saying, and who's my point person here in the district that's going to try to help me understand why these things are happening in my region? And more importantly, the bigger picture, how are we as a system, you, Brian Hill, board to board, whether it's CPDC or some new formation of that dealing with the land use people, how are we going to make sure this communication is heard, that we need to be part of this process? Because there are going to be situations which we are going to build ourselves. We're going to build more housing in places where we cannot contain the student population, and it's on the horizon right now. And Dr. Brabrand, I know, like you said, we've got to talk about all the things that you said.
Mr.
Boundaries.
Nikofas, could I put some?
You're on, okay. But those were two questions I had. Yes, you can put me back because I do have one more question.
Thank you.
Let me take the first one. Marty, Jeff, jump in. I think the best approach around the facilities numbers is much like what we did with the SOL numbers, where RAS and OSS met. This is where RAS and the facilities team we could set up times to go over and do some deeper diving. What are they seeing on the ground? What are they seeing in the numbers to start to share? That's number one.
And just let me clarify that. So they would meet first, and then I could meet with them as a regional person, because like I said, some of these I kind of know because I visited the schools, and that's where you get a lot of information. This is what we're seeing on the ground. So I guess I need, if that could be a next step, a process clarified.
Yeah,
A
we could-
process clarified
Absolutely.
to get analysis with regional assistant superintendent and facilities.
Yeah, and we'd be glad to work on a timeline either between now or after the CIP, where the RAS and the facilities meet with you, with board members to go over specifics about
Okay.
trends, what's on the ground. That's number one. Ms. Derenak Kofax, one thing I appreciate is a way to take something and just sort of summarize it in a sentence or two that is pithy and I think resonates. The system we have is broken. The system we have is broken, and there is major checks that are being written that are about to be cashed, and part of it is going to be cashed on the backs of Fairfax County Public Schools to be able to have the money to pay for these facilities, to then hire the teachers. And everybody's worried about a few pennies right now on the budget forecast. We're going to have to be able to get the community to understand there is a cost to be paid for this development, a cost. And it's for serving our community, right? So we have to decide the terms we even use. Businesses are investing in Fairfax, and in turn, we're going to have to invest in supporting the schools and the infrastructure and services that have the same high level of excellence, which is what brought the businesses here in the first place. And it's not an easy trade-off, but the way we've been doing it is say yes now and we'll figure out later is a broken system.
Okay.
I'm going to need your help. I'm meeting a lot with the county executive. I have been. I think we've got a much tighter budget dialogue, but this CIP structural one is something I think I'm going to continue to work on with the county executive, and I think it's part of our discussions when both boards meet about, can we create, I know there's the planning commission of the schools, thank you. The schools committee, the planning commission, and does that have enough teeth? Where right, it doesn't. How do we put the checks and balances in? And I want to help facilitate it. So maybe what I need to do is I'm hearing you
If I could
say.
just add, because we had CPDC meeting last night, and honestly, it was the best one we've had to date, because now we had sort of crystallized earlier with the board about the vision, and the charge coming out of that is engaging with staff. And it has to be two, it couldn't be all four of us, but two of us going as emissaries to the board of supervisors and beginning exactly this conversation
Good.
with two of them, their facility staff, and starting that discussion about common language, about building utilization, which I've talked about with you many times, is how much higher our community use does the wear and tear on our facilities versus, theirs. And this was the whole vision of turning CPDC into an active committee of the board, is so that we'd spend time on the CIP itself and begin this very difficult conversation of actually having a strategic vision around facilities. We spent all our time talking about budget, but we never talked about
Right.
facilities. And that was the whole vision of moving towards having an active role of this board in discussing the long-term strategic needs of facilities, of program placements, of access to land and other facilities that are not in use, all of it.
Thank you. I have Ms. Karen Kiskamara. Next.
So I'm happy to go after Ms. Derenak Kofax, because the fact of the matter is there is so much with the way our structure is and the way the laws prohibit even getting proffers to support the schools. That this definitely has to be a discussion. I'm not sure that I recall an approval. I think there's a wish list for CPDC. I'm not sure that we approved it as a board. We certainly need to talk about, that's not my recollection. We certainly need to talk about what that means, and part of the problem has been, Dr. Brabrand, that the communication was between this board and the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission merely makes a recommendation to the superintendent. The Board of right, the supervisors, that's what I'm trying to say. And that needs to be elevated, and I'm not sure, so there's a problem with proffers, there's a problem, I think, with notice when developers come. There's also a legislative component because our laws don't allow, for example, not having appropriate school facilities to be a reason to deny a development. I'm not suggesting that, but it is not something that could even be considered by a planning commissioner, for example. So certainly, I think we need to have some discussions as a board as to how we can collaborate with the Board of Supervisors to understand what is needed to go forward. And please knock off my time, he's about to talk.
I just want to say, you all have done joint committees with JET on the environment. You've done it with SKIP on youth. But the idea, this notion of bringing together people who've had planning commission experience, school board members on the board of supervisors, there needs to be some sort of intentional institutional collaboration to start to solve this problem. I'm not trying to say I am willing to take accountability, but I'm going to need some help because some of these structures are even beyond the scope of the superintendent to fix.
I'm agreeing with you. What I'm saying is we appreciate you helping to lay that groundwork to have a good relationship with the Board of Supervisors, but it needs to be much broader than that, and they need to understand what this board has to go through. I think it's also going to help them understand our funding requests.
Right.
So I think it is a significant part of what we need to talk about. I didn't want to take up all my time with that, but I did think that that was really, really critical. And so I would add to Ms. Dernek Koufax's request for a next step to make sure that we talk about the details of what that includes, especially notice to our facilities folks so we can then plan. So speaking of planning, the other question I wanted to raise was, as we look at some of the net transfers and some of the schools that were particularly hit, I would like to hear what recommendations we have for those schools. I know that we've recently come out of this political season and we heard all sorts of things about where people wanted to go versus where they didn't want to go. We need to talk about what that means, what that perception is in the community, and how we plan to address those perceptions. And so those are the things that I would like to look at these numbers and say, what does that mean in terms of how we address how the community is looking at our schools, and how do we get the programming in each of our schools so that we can address those perception issues.
Any further response from staff? Okay, I have exhausted the board members on my first list. If there is any board member who hasn't spoken, who wants to speak, all right, then I will ask my couple of questions, maybe just one question. Looking at the page 56, the transfers by school type, could you for us in public just to define what transfer is one more time? I read what was in the report, and I have a question after that.
So a transfer is a student who is an FCPS student that does not attend their base school. It can go to another school within FCPS. That student goes to another school besides the one it's originally assigned.
That's what I thought. So if there is one transfer from one school to another, that's one -1 for school, the base score, and it is a +1 for the receiving score. So if you add those two numbers, +1, -1, it has to be 0. Correct? You have another student in that situation. Add those numbers, and that should be 0 for the system-wide. So question is, on page 56, if you look at transfer by school type, how do we have a net numbers not equal to 0? Elementary is -1,059. Middle is -125. Is that,
So the
I'm
transfer,
trying to understand, because they are being transferred to centers?
yes. So
So centers are being,
we would include transfers in and out. Totals do not match due to students that reside outside of Fairfax County and the city of Fairfax and transfer into FCPS school or non-traditional schools. So this is kind of the overlap between migration and
Migration.
transfers. No students are assigned to the center schools. No students are assigned to the base school or to the other categories. So you'll always have a difference there. So the total is the net transfer in and out. Those students would be students who come to our centers and alternative programs, et cetera. I think that the transfers in, the 19,385 on that page 56, and then the 18,910, you see above in the other category, we don't have any transfers out. And then the centers and alternative programs, we don't have any transfers out. That's how we end up with a positive net transfer. Yeah, we can break it out in deep. Jeff's offering to break it out deeper, which we can do.
I mean,
Mr.
I do
Moon,
have those numbers on page 56.
Correct, yes, sir, but to your point, right? When you say transfer from one school, base school, into another school, we're talking about other ones that didn't have a base school in our system. And also, when we look at the alternative schools, they didn't have a one-to-one transfer for them. With Ms. Gillis's explanation, what I'd like to do is submit that we can break those individuals out so you can get the net plus and minus to be 0, and then the outliers that we were just talking about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I have several board members on the go back list, but I would like to limit the discussion by the board to be done by 10 minutes before 3 o'clock, so that we could allow ourselves at least 10 minutes for next steps. Then we'll be about an hour behind. If not, we'll be further behind. So I have 4 board members so far, and they are Daniela Colfax, Jenny Strauss, Megan McLaughlin, Elizabeth Schwartz. Anybody else wants to be put on the Karen Kiss camera? And then I have Daniela. Yeah, you are already on the list. Anybody else? I have 5 board members. So I'm going to have to limit each board member to no more than 90 seconds.
Moon, I just want to clarify, we're going to be 30 minutes behind, not an hour. We were supposed to start the next one at 2:30, and you're saying we'll wrap up at 3. It's a 30-minute delta, so I know you want to keep us on task,
I'm talking
but
about total. Total is will be about an hour behind.
I don't understand. The next session's supposed to start 2:30, and we'll be starting at 3.
Oh, they have
So it's
adjusted
30 minutes.
time?
No, it's what it's been.
I'm
Just
mistaken?
reassuring you that we're not
Sure,
as
sure.
far behind as you think.
Sure. Thank you. I stand corrected. Initially, it was from 2 to 5 on my calendar. Now it's 2:30 to 5:30, so we have a little more time. I have only about 3 minutes for each person. I have Mrs. McLaughlin next.
Well, I don't even think I'll have to take 3 minutes. So I just want to emphasize that Dr. Brabrand, you were talking about courage and, being able to have these important conversations. But I too want to take this moment right now to make sure there's clarity for the public about what some of this boundary conversation is. Because there were legitimate concerns, not just about Fairfax County, but anyone reading the Washington Post news coverage knows that Howard County Public Schools right now is engaging in a very serious conversation that goes far beyond what anything Fairfax County Schools is considering. As I've read the news coverage, Howard County is literally looking at doing boundary changes based on demographics. And that is very serious. And I've talked about it again and again, that's what I experienced when we lived briefly in Wake County, North Carolina, that they were looking at socioeconomics and changing boundary assignments based on balancing poverty. So when you're talking about some of the things we're going to need to do, I agree with you when we look at where we place our programs and how that compounds overcrowding, like language immersion, AAP centers, to just name two right off the bat, where we have academies, where we have other, that's within our sphere of influence and control of, you put a program in, you're going to drive students there. So how do we utilize the spaces that we have? But I just feel like there's a lot of public conversation happening in the Washington region right now, because apparently Montgomery County is now talking about what Howard County is doing, and I don't want the public to be looking at this and saying, what is Fairfax County channeling? And as I understand it, we're channeling capacity issues and program placement, but we still have a very deep commitment and respect for our neighborhood schools. So I don't want that lost. And the growth in Tysons and the growth in the Route 1 corridor, those are very real, and we're going to have to do this type of deliberative work that you're helping us and guide us toward. And again, I'm looking forward to the consultant helping us, and I would hope, identify where other school divisions did decide in the past to do demographic changes to boundaries, and how did that work out? Because our school division is doing great work on community schools. We're growing our community schools where we bring services in to our higher need communities. That's the opposite of forced busing and things that, understandably, people were trying to figure out what it would mean in Fairfax County, as we have a commitment to one Fairfax. And I wanted to provide that clarity, since that's tying into today's discussion.
Mrs. Strauss?
As we look at this and as we prepare for the CIP, and I believe we are going to have a work session on development issues, yes. Are we also going to look at ed specs? Because as those of us who are in parts of the county where there is the Board of Supervisors, and Ms. Keys-Gamarra, you spoke exactly, you've been on the Planning Commission. Those are the big issues that we have no control over, but it is our inability to provide school facilities. We follow development, and development can get way ahead of us. So the question is, ed specs, community expectation for what kinds of schools they're going to want in the future. I think that's a critical conversation. Because in some of the places where there is approved dramatic growth, we aren't exactly sure how long it's going to take for build-out. We're told it's going to be a long build-out process. In some areas, it's probably going to be shorter. But, people will say, well, where are you going to get the gazillions of acreage for this kind of school? And so my question is, are we going to look at ed specs? What is our expectation for basically more urban school planning? Obviously, it's not only parking, it's what kind of instructional spaces are we looking at? What are co-located issues? And I know we've talked about this a lot. We did, Dr. Brabrand many years ago, but it was during the recession that we had a facilities committee. And it resulted in about $13 million in some maintenance money, but it wasn't really visionary looking forward. And it was also at the time when a lot of the development pieces were becoming formed by the Board of Supervisors. And I think a lot of what they have planned to do in many areas, I think will bring a good economic growth and jobs, and all of the things are good for our citizens. But again, the conversation with the community, what kind of schools are you going to want? as we find we're going to have to provide probably more schools or renovate schools or do things in places where land is at a premium. And I don't think we've had some smaller conversations on that, but at some point, are we going to do that? When did we last look at ed specs? Because that is a major piece in your projections for CIP and long-term planning.
We had conversations and briefings on the ed specs when Mr. Sneed was still here, and he just retired not even a year ago, and the work sessions that we had on it. So generally speaking, it's a fluid document, to your
Right,
point,
exactly.
and we do have to bring it back, and usually it's within 3 years that any facilities master plan is part of bringing back in that time frame. We do work through the instructional services and special services departments to incorporate any modifications and health and PE for any changes for any physical space. But usually it's within 3 years, and I think within the 3-year time frame from the last time it was brought to the board in work session would probably be appropriate.
Okay, good, because even with some of the current high schools where we know we will have to probably do some additions, it's going to take some fast footwork to figure out how we're going to do that.
And I forgot to say, some of the things that we can incorporate, Ms. Strauss, in fact, in your magisterial district currently, we've even removed some of the lockers at the high school
Oh,
level,
I know
for
that.
example. So those are things that we do that are ongoing, that don't require that full 3-year cycle.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but for some of the additions and just finding a spot for new schools is onerous. So, thanks.
I have Mrs. Elizabeth Schultz to be followed by Delana Colfax.
So on this slide in particular, Dr. Braber, in terms of the analysis, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. So notice the centers and alternative programs have had a reduction of 4.1%. Those are the most expensive students practically that we have. So if you lose 4.1% in centers, and that's running, I don't know, $40,000, $50,000 a student, that's an add to the budget. So these are the things, these are the kind of things that, as you think about the budget and strategic planning and things in 3D, also what does that mean? Does it mean that because of our discipline practices, we're seeing more kids back in schools? What does that do? So that's one piece. A second piece, I'll pick up on my colleague, Ms. McLaughlin. We can't do demographic changes and target children by race. I'm glad I asked that question so many times in the last 18 months. It's too bad it was answered so late. Third was that Nanette Bowler, who I've tried, Megan and I have talked to Dr. Brabrand about, and she's no longer with the county. She's down in Richmond doing...
Assistant deputy.
I don't remember, but she's the one who sent her entire staff to basically data analytics university, if you will, and we're trying to get from her where she sent her staff. And one of the examples that she gave us, and I've shared this with a number of people on the staff, is that her staff was treating problems in the county based on feelings, like things that they thought needed to be done, and assumptions, and things like delivering services. And for example, they looked at young unwed mothers and the types of services they needed and where people thought in the county they may be as a, if you will, a heat map center. And people were thinking it might be Route 1, and people were thinking it might be Herndon. And so they were delivering services, and then when they actually did the data analytics, they were all jaw-dropped to find out that it was South County. And so that's the kind of information analytics that needs to happen with the staff. And in terms of program placement, there needs to be, and Mr. Plattenberg, you and I have had an excellent relationship, but I have pointed out things like need innovation out of facilities, need to identify things like flexible boundaries or program placement. And when I was at the JET meeting and the Joint Board of Supervisors meeting, everybody got their knickers in a twist when I said to the Board of Supervisors is mowing down a lot of trees and not talking to us And everywhere I turn, there's another density problem of jamming in high-density housing. And they all frankly freaked out when I said it. No, we plant more trees at Springfield Mall. Who cares? The problem is those density developments that are showing up on every corner, every little plot of land in Fairfax County, those have massive implications downstream to us. What we don't know, because we're not doing the information analytics to really understand where the children are coming and where we're going to need facilities, but that's the holistic conversation that really needs to happen on a going forward basis.
Thank you. Any response from staff? No comment. I have Mr. Fairfax to be followed by Karen Kiskamara, and that will end the list.
Thank you. This is the third leg of what I was talking about. I talked about the process we need to get to understand the data, working with Razis and and that was a follow-up. That will be a next step. I talked about, board to board, Dr. Brabrand to Brian Hill, how we're going to ensure that they're listening to us. The one thing, if we could pull up page 26 of the 114-page report. One thing that we are already hearing from Brian Hill is that, and I am 100% in favor of this, making sure we have enough affordable housing and workforce housing. But we need to carry this page around. We need to laminate this page. We need to ensure that everybody understands where this is. And page 26. There we go. It's basically membership by FRM at attending high schools and pyramids. And this gets back to our, and this goes back to conversations that we've had of distributing, making sure housing patterns are distributed throughout the county, making sure that tipping points that do happen don't exist, and making sure there's equitable distribution. So this is again, it's a leg of a stool of multiple issues, but I think this particular page, it shows it all. You see there you see their schools with 2% FRM, and you see their schools with 57% FRM, and 63. Yeah. So this has to be part of the conversation, particularly when we do the county. We talk about all these issues. The county has to be very aware of this. It seems, I'm assuming that they do know this, but I feel sometimes they're not looking at this part of the analysis when they're talking about affordable housing or workforce housing, which I think we need, but it has to be distributed. So certain schools don't have an inordinate amount of assistance that they need because of the populations that are coming to their schools.
Okay, thank you. I have Karen Kiskamara, and I'll have a very short go back to Corbett Sanders.
Okay. Again, Ms. Derner-Kofax, I think part of the problem is that much of what you're talking about is very much developer-driven. And so certainly we need to have the conversation, but I'll just move on because I don't want Mr. Moon to rein me in. So one of the things that I'm concerned about is that, and I know this was a concern when I was on the Planning Commission, is that we were worried that the projections about students coming from development, whether those were accurate or not. So that's another aspect that perhaps we should look at as a next step, is to look at what the projections have been in the past and how they have impacted us. I see Mr. Plattenberg would like to respond before I continue, reserve the rest of my 90 seconds.
No, it was just to really agree with you and say that that's the discussions we're having with the schools committee, because it was based upon a countywide average projection set, and therefore our projections that we used were different. So it was just bully and agreed.
But obviously, we need to look at it more accurately, more with respect to each particular area, because everything comes out in the wash when we look at it across 1 million plus people, right? And I know we, going forward, we'll be talking about this with our boundary criteria. But as we go forward, you know, I assume we will be, again, talking about neighborhood schools, minimizing bus times, and understanding that the comprehensive plan has already been revised, at least when I was on the board. We were working on revising it to allow that flexibility so that we weren't having the same criteria of what a suburban school would look like. So some of this may be part of what that committee needs to talk about, is just understanding what is possible, and then that will help us to move forward.
Any comment from staff? If not, I have Karen Corbett Sanders as the last one.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on Ms. Derenak-Kofax's comment about workforce housing, affordable housing, and concentration of poverty. I want to make it pretty clear that workforce housing doesn't typically result in concentrations of poverty. Where we have concentrations of poverty is attributed to two things. One is aging housing stock that is rental, and without an obligation placed on the owners of that housing stock to keep it up to a certain quality standard, and so that's part of it, as well as the decrease of affordable housing by our neighboring jurisdictions, both Arlington and Alexandria, that dropped their affordable housing by 90% and 85%, respectively. Additionally, I want to talk about making sure that when we look at these numbers, there are instances where we have high poverty schools. The students that are represented in those high poverty schools oftentimes are on buses that go past other schools to get to them. And so it is something that it's more complex than perhaps the data on these pages reflect. And so it is an ongoing conversation that needs to take place, but it is one that has to take place in collaboration with the Board of Supervisors. And so I just wanted to clarify those points. Thank you.
Any comment? Then we have a next steps. Okay, everyone takes a look at the language up there, and then we'll go one by one. If anything is missing, start writing down your next step and send it to Madam Clerk so that she can post. Okay, 166, Chairman.
That is more explicitly pull out TJ from the rest of Region 2 in the same way that we've addressed alternative schools and centers.
On all data chart, is that?
It was precisely on a second. The page number, I apologize.
Okay, while Chairman Corbett Sanders is looking for the page number, we can go to Mrs. Strauss's.
There was, in addition to that, though, I also had a question about the number of foster students in our school system and whether there was any concentration of them.
Okay.
I could answer the actual number. We have 168 students, but I don't have the information for concentration at this time.
Okay, so let's put that up, and then staff can respond to that later when they respond to the next steps. So while we are still, Chairman may be looking for page number for 166. Let's go to Mrs. Strauss's for
Okay,
167.
that is accurate, but I would add, highlight any schools that may be significant outliers when compared to the overall accuracy countywide. So it's really the outliers.
Okay, so Mrs. Rose, could you take a look at the language up there as being
Maybe
typed
significant- oh,
one more
it's-
time?
Yes, no,
And
that's
see
fine.
whether that captured yours?
Yep, that's
Okay.
fine.
And then 168 is Mr. Narcofax?
Yeah, I would add to clarify process for board members to get regional analysis of trends and membership data with RAS and facilities, just put staff, it's not with facility staff.
Okay. And then
And Vice Chairman, or Meeting Manager Moon, it's page 10 of the briefing.
Page 10, okay. On page 10, all right, thank you, that's very helpful. 169 is Keith Kamara.
Yeah, that was directed to Dr. Bravery, and I think he understood what I was
All
just
right.
looking for a plan. And 170 is looking at the accuracy of projections.
Accuracy of projections.
Mhm.
Okay. And 171 was retrusted done. Any next step missing? Okay, so could you? 172 add,
Okay.
please.
Yeah, the macro level piece of it, that this is just a data report. It's not data analysis, so. Okay. So I just,
Okay, since Madam Clerk may be posting some more next step, is that correct? You have to type those up, okay, all right. Okay, go ahead, please,
well,
Mrs.
no,
McLaughlin.
it's okay. If Ms. Schultz has captured it in terms of
Okay,
that
so
we
that's
need
just
the data
one.
analysis.
So you say you had a whole bunch of, if,
Well, I said between Ms. Schultz and myself, we both asked for quite a few
Okay.
things, so.
Mrs. Church sent in too, so, so any other board members? Is the missing next step? If not, we are waiting for
Well,
what Mrs. Church has sent in first. So that's identify, right, not identify? Okay, so Mrs. Schwartz, 172, is that correct language?
Yep.
Okay, 73, is that? Okay, and Mrs. McLaughlin, you have some more to add?
Well, for numbers 173, I'd probably be a little more prescriptive in saying that I'd like for Dr. Brabrand to find out about the data analysis training that county staff had done in human services and report back into Brabrand briefing.
Yeah, I just
what
figured
his
that was like
thinking
the
is.
subtext underneath, but I think the point of 173 is, I think it's incumbent on the board to ask for what professional development is the staff going to get to go acquire the skills to produce for the board data analysis to help the board make strategic decisions better. And if we don't understand where that planning and professional development is going to come from, then that's on us for not asking for it. So that's, this is the board taking on the responsibility of
Okay.
understanding how they're going to get
So-
that information in the
So
future.
Mrs. McLaughlin, does that language capture what you are requesting?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Brabrand, the point is that we're just, it's for you to digest, but reporting back. The other one, 175, I guess that I would want to add in there is, I would like for the superintendent to circle back with the chair and vice chair about a follow-up work session where we'll actually have an opportunity to hear from the superintendent the actual analysis of this membership report. 'Cause
So consider scheduling a follow-up work session for the board to Here, receive
the superintendent's analysis
superintendent's
of the
analysis on
data report.
membership data.
of the membership data report.
Okay. Consider scheduling a follow-up work session for the board to receive superintendent's analysis of the membership data. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
so, yeah, receive, where the word receive is, put superintendent's analysis, please. Thank you.
Okay, with that, unless there is an objection in accepting these as next steps, those will be accepted, and this portion of work session is adjourned. We'll take a 5-minute break and resume at 3:15.